interested in organizing an event like this, you get to meet really fun and interesting people like our guests today. So yeah, feel free to come chat with me after if you're ever interested in joining the leadership of the policy cluster here at the Hub. So the impetus for this event was that the City of Seattle Climate Action Plan team released a progress report in September, and they will also be doing an update to the plan in Q1 of next year. And so I felt this was a good opportunity for members at the Hub, also people who are just interested in these sorts of things, to come together and learn a bit about the progress report from people that were directly involved in putting the report together. And for that to be an opportunity for us to start thinking about and generating ideas that we can feed into the update in Q1. So there'll be another opportunity for us to come together and provide input in that way when we're doing some community engagement on the update kind of plan. So I'm very lucky to be joined by members of the Office of Sustainability and the Environment, the Office of Economic Development, and Seattle Public Utilities, all folks that were members of the team that put the progress report together, as I mentioned. I'm just very thankful that they were willing to come and help us understand the progress report and help us have this discussion. So I will ask them all to come up now and introduce themselves. They have a lot of great experience in the city of Seattle, and I'll start with you, Ami.
Thank you, Mary, and hi, everyone. My name is Ami Krishnan. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Climate Data and Policy Manager for the Climate Justice Team at the Office of Sustainability and Environment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashana Soklev. I go by Ash, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Seattle Public Utilities, which is the city department that manages waste and water for the city. And I'm our climate and circular economy policy advisor.
Hi there, I'm Vin Valentino. I'm the Key Industries Manager with the Office of Economic Development, and I lead our community initiatives.
Awesome, thanks so much, you guys. I think what we'll start with is they all prepared a few slides to kind of give us an overview of the Climate Action Plan and specifically the recent progress report. And then we have some questions for discussion that they've also prepared, but really want to open it up to all of you after the presentation. We'll bring the lights up to just have a really open discussion about questions you might have, ideas you might have. So I will hand it off to Ani.
Alrighty, thank you. So before we get started here, I want to just ask you all, how many of you are familiar with the Seattle Climate Action Plan? Show of hands. A few in the room. Okay, great. So we actually launched our first and only climate action plan back in 2013. Okay, so it was 12 years ago, and it was our moment to just rally around what we needed to do to meet our emissions reduction targets. And since then, we've been doing a lot of work, but we haven't fully taken a look back formally to understand what our progress had been in those 12 odd years. So this team that we put together was tasked with not only coming up with that look back and creating a formal evaluation of where our actions landed, but also tasked with coming up with an updated climate action plan that addresses the hazards that we know we're facing today, and knowing how climate work touches so many of us in so many different ways. So here are some of the key contributors for our climate action planning team. We've got the team, we've got our leadership, we've got a climate action work group that both Ash and Vin are part of. We've got a directors forum, which involves directors of 17 different departments working on this collectively. We have a Green New Deal Oversight Board, which is a board that's comprised of community members, experts in their field who represent varying interests like labor, like youth, like sustainability, and tribal interests, all of those. We're obviously working closely with both the Mayor's Office and City Council on this. We're also putting together a green ribbon panel, and then of course we've got consultants to help us manage all of these different moving parts. So I also want to touch on the planning process and where we are with this updated climate action plan before we dive into the progress report. So we earlier this year is when Mayor Harrell released this executive order saying that, hey, we need to update our climate action plan. And we started that up and began with figuring out where we are, and that's when we decided to create a progress report. And the next stage for that, after that, is setting the stage to understand where are we in terms of the progress we've made, as well as what are other cities doing about the climate crisis, and how do we learn from them through a literature review process. And then the next phase is really identifying what updated actions need to go in this plan based on what we've done, based on what we know our challenges are, where do we need to be going, and that's going to be the work of the next quarter, really is potentially longer to figure out what those are, prioritize those actions, like we'll come up with a bunch of great ideas, but how do we figure out which ones go in the plan? And then establish a mechanism to track the progress of those actions. You'll see when we talk about the progress report that we don't have a formal way of doing that, and so we need to establish that early on for this update. And then finally report out and share. So here's what the progress report is. The purpose of this 2013 Climate Action Plan progress report is really launching the One Seattle Climate Action Plan update process and reporting on the 148 actions that were in there, right? So over the course of these next few slides, I'm going to touch on some of that content, highlighting key successes, challenges, and opportunities. But we also have a link down below, seattle.gov/climate-action-plan if you want to read the whole report. We have an executive summary, which is a short 8 pages, if you prefer that version instead. Without further ado, I'll dive right in. So overall, across these categories that you see here, transportation, land use, building energy, waste, and preparing for climate change, which were the original categories of the actions in our plan, we completed or made significant progress on 88 of those 148 actions. And that works out to just about under 60%. But that doesn't mean that all of those actions had an emissions reduction impact. Some of the actions were just foundational in getting those other high impact actions possible. And here are some of the things that we as a city did really well across these sectors, right? So we really expanded our mass transit options. We put in 5 new rapid ride bus routes, link light rail stations. We also put in a lot of housing units, over 60,000 housing units in those core urban centers, giving people the opportunity to live in low pollution neighborhoods like that. We lead the nation with our energy code, our commercial energy code. We have a really strong energy code, which the state actually follows. So they adopt ours like a few years after we adopt or we enact energy codes. So we've been doing really well with energy codes. And we also have emissions performance standards in place for buildings over 20,000 square feet, like this one, to cut emissions 27% in commercial buildings by 2050. Waste, which is the department that SBU represents, ASH represents, reduced food and construction waste through lots of innovative rules and ordinances, and in the waste sectors where we saw the biggest drop in emissions since we started measuring emissions in 2008, 31% reduction there. So huge kudos to SBU and ASH's team there. And then finally, with adaptation, we've been doing a lot of work there, investing tens of millions of dollars in the Duwamish Valley and many other parts of the city, specifically to help our most impacted communities deal with the effects of climate change. And then we've also been working to increase our tree canopy. We're actually very close to reaching our 2030 tree canopy goal, and we're doing that years ahead of the deadline, so to speak, our internally enclosed deadline. So lots of successes in the plan. And we did have trouble with some things though, right? So we struggled with implementing progressive road pricing solutions, right? Like making sure that we're taking back our streets for the things that we want to do on them. We also struggled with figuring out how to affect significant change in residential buildings. So we have a handle on how to do it for commercial buildings, but we don't have the authority to do a residential energy code, for example. So that was challenging to us, and that's something that we're still figuring out. On the waste side, we are dealing with compliance gaps, changes in how waste streams have evolved since the pandemic, and with more people buying things online. And so some of that is what Ash's team is working on. And then we talked about the investments in adaptation and resilience, but we need so much more. We need so much more money to do all of the things that we need to do. And so really focusing on how we expand that, right? And so on this next graph, you'll see how that progress manifests in terms of emissions reduction, right? So this is a graph showing emissions that the city is responsible for, and by the city I mean not just our municipal operations, but all of us, residents, businesses, all of you. And since our 2008 baseline, we reduced emissions by about 12%. And in this period, we did this while population grew by 30% and while the GDP grew by over 60%. So it's good progress, but we need to be going 10 times faster than that if we want to hit our 2030 target of a 58% reduction in our baseline. So that's the enormity of the task that we have at hand. And we, by the way, we need to get to net carbon neutral by 2050, right? No big deal. That has to happen too. And the kicker is that this isn't all of it, right? This is just emissions, all of those successes that we talked about, mobility, tree canopy, resilience, all of those outcomes that we really want to affect for our residents, like better health, better air quality, better access to nature. Those don't show up in this graph. So we also need a better way to measure the outcomes that we care about. And that's also something that we're looking to address in our updated climate action plan. So looking forward, those are the things that we need to do, right? We need to scale up what we know works, what we know we do well. I think that's part of it, is like understanding where our bounds are as a city and as specific city departments. What do we have authority to influence, and doing those things well while addressing the barriers that come in our way and the barriers that we've experienced. Centering resilience and equity, right? So focusing not just on emissions, but everything that comes with it, all of those co-benefits. And then really finding a way to tell the story of that progress and evaluating that progress holistically, regularly, and transparently, right? I don't want to come back to you 12 years from now, if I'm still working at the city, to be like, we made some progress, we made a little progress. No, I want to be able to tell you very specifically where we moved the needle. And that starts with having a data system that can track that from the get-go. So with that, here's how we're engaging and hoping to engage with folks. When we update the climate action plan, we have set up community assemblies, which are partner-led forums, centering frontline voices. These have already happened. There's one happening at the end of this week too. Doing storytelling partnerships to really gather community perspectives and build a shared understanding of what we think the goals of the climate action plan are. Audience-specific events, of course, like this one, and like Mary alluded to, will be hopefully coming back to you. Engaging tribal nations and collaborating them in a way that meets them where they are. And then strategic public outreach and city ambassadors that really help us mobilize our staff, mobilize our community partners, and mobilize our strategic partnerships. So with that, I'm passing it over to Vin, who's going to talk about what are you going to talk about?
Great question. I forgot I was going next. Hi everyone. I'm going to remain sitting just to be here with you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Office of Economic Development's green economy portfolio. But I do want to just highlight a few things Ani said. We need to go a hell of a lot faster, which we're gearing up to do, and we need a whole lot more money. And the other thing that is peppered in there that OED thinks a lot about is we need to build a whole lot of new things, technology and infrastructure. So much of what you'll see that I will briefly talk about is how we've tried to play our part as part of the city. There are things the Office of Sustainability should do that we are a supporter on. There are things Seattle Public Utilities or Seattle City Light should do that we support on. And there are things that OED can do as the lead that support the rest of this. And I'll talk a little bit about that now. This is a quick snapshot of our green economy portfolio. You'll recognize the name of this place at the top. You're living in one of them. This was a huge gap we realized here. There's a giant need for people who are thinking about how to build future technologies that help us solve climate change, help us have a more resilient economy. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The Washington State Green Bank, as we just said, there's not enough money to do this, but money is one of those crazy things that you can be really creative with it and it can go a lot further, and we hope the Green Bank can do that. I won't talk a ton about our citywide workforce development strategy, except for to say we are blessed as a city to have public utilities, part of our city government, and we are blessed as a city to have 2 public utilities that have climate right at the core of some of their services, which means we are one of the only cities in the country that can create good green jobs within our city government. Many other cities have to rely on external networks to do that. And then I'll talk a little bit about kind of our big green economy strategy, but just to talk about this space, I saw Lowell in here earlier, and I see Laura over there, but there you are. So about a year and a half ago, Lowell, myself, some folks from the University of Washington, and Ina Abiodun from VirtuLab started convening because we recognized there was a gap in terms of a lot of people working on climate technology that didn't have a place to convene, didn't have a place to gather and share thoughts. There was no sort of climate-oriented incubation or acceleration programming here, except for some stuff with the blue economy. And there was no way that many of the folks in those groups had access to private capital or to the corporate environment where there's a whole lot more money. So we created this space. You've got 9-0 leading a lot of the co-working work, which this is a great result of. Around the corner, you'll see some spots from UW. They expanded their co-motion programming to include climate tech, and they're building that out now with some friends at the Clean Energy Institute. And VirtuLab really brings that sort of private connection, and they lead their own VC investment. And our theory of change here was our downtown needs to evolve. We're still recovering from COVID. We have a lot of incredibly talented people here. Why not get them in a room, make sure they have the connections and resources they need, and help us invent some of the technology to solve the most pressing challenge of our time. So this is where we think about all of this, but we also think about, in a lot of ways, what you all do here, what the hub is supposed to do is make the innovation system accessible. In OED, we think about equity in terms of access to economic opportunities. High-wage jobs is one of those, but also IP development, starting your own business. There's some opportunities in that space, there's a ton of opportunities in that space for clean energy, and so we're hoping the hub can be an avenue for that. We've all kind of just briefly chatted about money. We need a lot more money to do things about climate change. And I worked with the Department of Commerce, colleagues across the city, to create the Washington State Green Bank. This is a 501c3, and the Green Bank is effectively a special lender that's their whole purpose is how they create new financial tools and get money out into the world that catalyzes and accelerates clean energy deployment. We have not had one in Washington, despite numerous attempts to create it for a number of systemic reasons. We were successful in creating it last year, getting some operational funding from the state, and it is now seeking full capitalization, which we're feeling very optimistic about. But in theory, a green bank should just make it cheaper to put clean energy out there, both the kind of clean energy that you put in your home and the kind that needs to go onto the grid to make all of our lives better. And then finally, I'm not going to totally go through this, but OED really thinks about because we need to, in a lot of ways, build our way out of climate change, we think Seattle is probably the best place in the country to do this. And I'm not saying this just because I really love Seattle. I do. I'm from the Midwest, so I just see opportunities everywhere when I'm here. But Seattle has the exact right mix of workforce in terms of tech workers, aerospace workers, world-class manufacturers. We have the right R&D system owing much to the university, but also to many of the industries here, many of the businesses here. We have an international port in our downtown. We have some of the most advanced climate policy in the world. And we are the largest concentration of tribal nations in the country, and we have some of the highest union rates in the country. For us, this adds up to, of maybe the 5 places in the US that can build climate technology, we are the only one that can do it with climate justice at its center. And I think that gives us a clear mandate to do the goddamn thing and build this stuff. And that is what this strategy is all about. What you see with this big spin wheel is a model that we know works in Massachusetts. Mass CEC is a statewide organization in Massachusetts. It's not quite a government agency, but it's kind of one, and they spend around $50 million a year ensuring that people in their university systems move out of it, start their own businesses, get the investment they need to grow, have the supports they need to move from a laptop to a hard bench to a factory floor, tee up some projects for those businesses, whether it's grid-scale solar, battery technologies, and then they bend the public workforce system to those projects so that the high-wage job opportunities there, electricians, HVAC techs, what have you, are accessible to everyone. We think we can create a version of this here, and we're on our way to doing so. All to say, this is how OED thinks about the green economy, and we try to play our part in the city by effectively creating businesses and workers that can help the city and other utilities buy locally, for lack of a better term, when we're trying to solve climate change. And I think that's everything I got.
Thanks, Vin. Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to wrap us up with really talking about how the city works with climate innovators, so all of you. Obviously, the climate action plan that Ani spoke about is going to be a great moment for engagement and collaboration for all of us. But we're also keen to build longer term relationships and move beyond planning into actual action together. And so just from Seattle Public Utilities perspective, I thought I would share a few examples of how we currently work with climate entrepreneurs and climate tech companies and nonprofit organizations that are working in this space. Our focus is primarily on water and waste, so those are sort of the industries that we're looking at. One example is through business support. So there is a accelerator program that's focused on the circular economy called Next Cycle Washington. I know a lot of folks that were in that accelerator program are also based out of here. The City of Seattle helped launch that program and continues to support it. We also have an internal impact investment fund. So every year we're trying to identify relatively small pilot projects that both support economic development, some of us use kind of operational needs, and have equity at the center of those projects too. So for example, we kicked off a training program for formerly incarcerated folks to learn deconstruction skills so that they can participate in the deconstruction economy in Seattle. We also definitely have grants available from the City of Seattle, our department specifically, but also across many departments too. For example, the SPU Waste Free Communities Matching Grant. That is typically more focused at nonprofit organizations, but many of those nonprofits eventually move into operating as for-profit organizations too. So we really support those kinds of organizations on their journey. And then lastly, Vin kind of alluded to this, but there's a lot to be built in the new green economy that we're trying to create in Seattle. SPU itself has a lot of internal targets on reducing our own emissions in our operations. We're a huge energy consumer when it comes to municipal departments. We get water down from the watersheds to the city. We have pipes all over the city. We have infrastructure, fleet, it's a significant fleet, trash trucks kind of across the city. So there's a big carbon footprint that we have as a department. And so we're constantly looking for ways that we can improve our procurement and purchasing and infrastructure, whether that's installing solar panels on our facilities or electrifying our fleet. And we're also looking to use that purchasing power that we have to kind of support climate entrepreneurs and buy locally, essentially. So yes, city procurement processes are not always the easiest, but we're really looking to kind of pilot with climate entrepreneurs that are based in Seattle to essentially be a little bit of a playground where you can try out your new technologies or help scale some existing technologies that you might have in our own operations. So we will wrap up there. We did have a couple of discussion questions that we'll just throw out there to all of you, and also open up for any Q&A that you have. We would love to hear reflections on the past from all of you. So Ani talked through successes and challenges that we identified in the Climate Action Progress Report. Do they ring true for you? Is there anything that you've seen in the last decade in Seattle that you're particularly proud of, or that you think we're struggling with right now that we should be paying attention to? We obviously want to hear your priorities for the future, so as we are kicking off this planning process, what absolutely must be reflected in the Climate Action Plan update? And then we're also curious to hear how we can work together going forward. Have you already had experiences working with local government? How could we collaborate? I mentioned a few examples, but really eager to hear from you all on what kind of leadership and support you want to see from the City of Seattle. So I'll just leave those up there and hand back to Mary to see if there's anything else.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just having Laura raise the light so we can now have just more of a group discussion on this. Maybe I can start, and then as you're thinking about your responses or your questions, I'll call on whoever raises their hand next. I had one reflection on the past, and I'm curious how you guys think about this. There's been some discussion in press because of something that I think it was Bill Gates said recently about needing to transition away from emissions reduction and more towards mitigation. And based on the data you showed and how much we have to accelerate our emissions reduction actions to achieve our goals, I'm curious how you guys think about that perspective, and how feasible it is to achieve our emissions reduction goals versus how much we should try to allocate funding towards mitigation and adaptation.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'll just start off by we need to do all of it. We have to, you saw the data, we have to reduce our emissions, and we also have to have a really robust climate adaptation strategy and resilience strategy, because the reality is that these climate hazards are hitting Seattle and they're hitting us now. So it is, we have to do both. We know there are limited resources, and that's why planning efforts like this are important, so that we can identify what budgets are required to meet the targets we have, to kind of allocate our own staff appropriately. So it's, there is, I think the City of Seattle has definitely reached a point where we know that we need to do both, and we have to do both of them pretty quickly. So it's, I don't think it's a shift away from one or the other. It's kind of trying to figure out how you allocate the resources between them.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Ash. And I think the one thing I'll add is that if we don't do mitigation, we will have to do far more to adapt, because our climate is just going to get exponentially worse if we stop working on those emissions. So I think that's the one thing I would counter Mr. Gates' argument. But it also, see him in the press. I'll see him in the press. No, I think that makes it challenging though, because again, we're talking about funding, and there's this really important question of where do we allocate funds? Because oftentimes with mitigation, if we spend $10 million and reduce those emissions by 5% or 10% next year. These are arbitrary, by the way. I don't know what it's really going to cost. That's part of the problem. But if we do that, it's not like our residents are going to see that impact right away. But if we, say, build a seawall in the Duwamish, or retrofit buildings so that they are invest in better air circulation or air filters and things like that, that's adaptation work, and the impacts of that work is felt immediately by constituents. And so that's also something we need to grapple with. What should we invest in today to see the benefits today versus what are the things we need to invest in now, and we're not going to really see the impacts of until a decade or two from now.
I would just extremely disagree with Mr. Gates. I agree with my colleagues, but also if you set aside, which is tough to do with something like climate change, but set aside the morality of it, which is pretty black and white, economically, it is an incredibly smart investment to be putting more clean energy out there right now, and more resilience technology. And that's sort of the approach we take in OED is, yes, it's very mission aligned, but like these are the types of businesses we're going to need. These are the types of technologies we're going to need. We may as well do it first, do it best, do it right. And if you'd love to invest, we'd be happy to work with it.
Got it.
I have two questions. One, back to the emissions. Do you have a per capita to be fair to yourself, I feel?
Yeah, we do have a per capita number, and we actually have reduced per capita emissions in that same time period, 2008 to 2022, by about 30%, which is great. And it means that for every person we're adding to the city, our emissions aren't increasing by that number. Like we're getting people who are using less and so on and so forth. But the thing with emissions is that it is still an absolute number, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if our per capita emissions go down a lot, but those emissions are still going up into the atmosphere one way or another, right? And so it's something that we grapple with. It does make us feel a little better. We get asked by electeds about this all the time. I have to do the inventory again next year. I'm 100% sure it's going to come up. They're like, what about per capita? Isn't that going to paint us in a better light? And it does, but it doesn't change the fact that our absolute emissions are only going down at the rate that I showed.
Michael Water. On the, I'm just get hopefully you can answer this. Is this all internal funded climate action planning, or are you getting some outside funding to help support it?
The planning process itself, that's primarily all internal funding, but once we figure out the actions, I'm sure there's going to be, partnerships that we're going to need to rely on to actually implement that work.
And in terms of the consultants, who do y'all have staffing what parts of it?
Yeah, so we're working with Makers Architecture and Urban Design. I don't know if you're all familiar with them. They're kind of our primary consultants who are helping us with planning this out, figuring out what we need to put in the plan, running these events like the summit that we just mentioned. And then we also have a communications consultant, Soapbox, who are helping us shape most of our comms materials. Now, we are, one of the challenges that we're going to grapple with very soon as we go into developing the plan is that we have to come up with actions and then figure out how deep do we need to go to understand the impacts of these actions and what it's going to cost and what it's going to take to implement. And those can be projects in and of themselves for each of those actions.
So that's going to be my next question, which was sort of like on the modeling side, like how, is that part of the, I assume it would be to quantify some of this, like what sort of modeling approach are you going to take?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of budget to do that, but I don't think that is going to be sufficient to get to the level of granularity we'll need for an implementation plan. And so maybe that's where we're going to have to draw a line and say, here are the actions we want to commit to, and let's find a reasonable place to say, we want to do all of these things and let's put this plan out. And then phase 2 is understanding specifically how we want to implement each of those.
So you don't plan on getting to that level of technical detail?
I don't think we're going to be able to in the next 6 months. It's just not. My hope is as well is that we don't have 148 actions in there this time around, and that we really consolidate and focus on what matters, and again, what we do well, what we know we can get off the ground. But once we put that out there, I think there is going to be a question around, okay, if these are our priorities, how do we get that done? And that's where, we'll be reaching, across the city to our colleagues here, across to you all to understand, where are those pockets of expertise that we can lean on.
Yeah, I mean, there's some significant, Stockholm departments too, so we know those folks. Yeah, that, people that know this stuff really, really well. One just brief word of caution, you don't even have to comment on, which is Like I noticed, I know you've done the consumption-based stuff in the past, Pete Erickson stuff, one friend of mine. So that's great, but I noticed like in the EIS, which I know y'all do for the comp plan, like they did some analysis and they basically concluded that like adding people to Seattle would increase emissions, like adding density to the city would increase emissions and therefore was a bad thing. So basically not looking at the out of city boundary effects of things. So just where the inventory can sometimes kind of mislead you.
We did conduct a consumption-based emissions inventory.
Which has
It
its
was-
own problems.
Yes, exactly. I totally agree. But like Ani and I are always talking about this, like that the current greenhouse gas inventory we have shows just such a sliver of like Seattle's broader climate impacts, and so that's where I think some of what Ani said about like the other outcomes that we're looking for will come into play. And our department is really focused on like how do we not just like recycle and compost better, but also reduce waste and prevent it from the first place and change the way that Seattleites are kind of consuming things. So that's very much part of our focus I don't know if we'll be like reporting on a consumption-based emissions inventory every 5 years or something. Yeah, exactly. But we will have some kind of acknowledgement that like the food that we all eat and the things that we buy and the buildings that we live and work in have emissions, and transportation, all of it has an emissions impact, and we need to have that kind of systemic view of climate, of emissions essentially, as opposed to just like energy and transport emissions essentially.
Hi there. I'm curious if in collaboration with the Seattle Public Schools as partner or education.
I can start with, for Seattle Public Utilities, we do work with Seattle Public Schools primarily on like waste education. We also are running a program with them right now on reusable dishware. So currently most schools have like single-use packaging that they're using to serve food in. We're piloting, I think it's with about 13 schools right now, to switch that to reusable dishware, which only makes sense in kind of a cafeteria environment with great results. The students love it, the teachers love it, the staff love it. So we're working, I personally see public schools as such a great environment to pilot things in, and to like all of the areas that we're working in, we should be kind of making sure our schools are following along with them. So whether that's solar installations or urban gardens or zero waste, like all of those things should be happening at our schools, because it's also an education lever for the next generation too.
Yeah, okay.
Quick. In OED, we do think a lot about workforce development, which slightly overlaps with early learning and education, so we work with the Department of Early Learning and Education quite closely. A little less on curriculum and a little more on what skills people need, in particular in a clean energy economy, and in particular in a time when I think we hear overwhelmingly college does not seem to be what it used to be, and it is not something students are always looking for. So how we are creating alternate models of socioeconomic advancement, particularly through the publicly owned workforce system. And as in OED, and I think throughout the city, we do think about the opportunity there to ensure job seekers in particular of various ages throughout the city have the right skill sets they need in order to be a part of the clean energy economy. Overwhelmingly, the one thing we continue to hear is you gotta be able to pass some basic math if you want to be involved in any capacity in that sort of hands-on technical role. And that's kind of an ongoing conversation within the city. And I'll say Seattle City Light does some great work with their BEAM program and the Seattle colleges. Not totally hitting exactly Seattle public schools, but slightly adjacent.
And I'll just quickly add, the schools are part of our municipal portfolio of buildings, right? The schools themselves, right? So we are definitely working with them very regularly through our office and through many other offices to ensure that they have all of the upgrades that they need to ensure that they are transitioning to clean energy. We have a mandate that all municipal buildings need to transition to fossil fuel free, systems. And so we're working with the schools on that. And like Ash alluded to, those are great examples of education in those schools for those kids to go and understand what it means to be in that kind of building. And really for me, the thing that I'm hoping kids get out of it is like, you grow up in that kind of environment, you almost take it for granted a little bit, and then when you see something that isn't like that, you're like, wait a second, why are you burning blah blah blah? Like I have a 2-year-old, and I also have an electric car, and he knows that when it's parked, it's charging, and so he points at he thinks all cars are charging when they're parked now, so like that's what we need to get them early.
Yeah.
Hi, Steve Winkleman in the back. You mentioned not having enough money, and it's so often that we only have, millions of dollars for climate, but then there are billions for housing and for infrastructure. And so one of the frameworks that I found helpful is sort of ask the climate question on the policies in other departments, the budgets, and saying, is it making it better? Is it worse? How can we make it better? So for example, the 60,000 new housing units is going to be a huge win on mitigation. And if you look at Seattle City Light, that's my question, how much you sort of collaborate with them. Like, don't put just solar, like do solar and storage so you can bring resilience benefits, and then you can leverage that money that's going to be spent anyways and have the climate dollar go farther. So I'm curious specifically around engagement around housing or Seattle City Light.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, zooming out a little bit, I think the concept that you were touching on, which is going to be so important for us, is just climate budgeting, right? So understanding that climate work is not just something that lives in 1 or 2 or 3 departments. It's really looking at how we budget as a city across the board for capital investments, for infrastructure, for programming, for policy, and understanding what the climate links are there so that we can really leverage what we need to happen in this transition and make sure that we're there in the room early as this working group to say, hey, before you go out and set up a capital plan, which will determine the direction of your investments for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years. Let us talk to you and ensure that we are checking some, if not all, of those climate boxes. And so I know that City Light is thinking about this, it's keeping them up at night, right? They were at our summit yesterday, and we heard about how even without the tsunami of data centers that we're going to see worldwide, right, because of AI and whatnot, even without that, every new megawatt hour of power that City Light needs to provide for our growing population is no longer going to come from our clean hydro. It's going to come from the retail market, because our hydro essentially is it's a great resource, but it's defined, it's capped, and we can't scale that up necessarily unless we retrofit dams, which is a whole other conversation. But that means that we have to, we need to figure out what to do with that investment, right? Like, do we actually take that out to the retail market and buy that power knowing that it doesn't satisfy our climate targets? Or do we, really pivot and understand how do we continue to drive down energy consumption while growing our population, right? It's such a challenging problem. I don't envy my colleagues at City Light, but we're here for them. We're here to collaborate and really understand how to tackle that together.
Hi, Teresa Keith. Thanks for the presentation and especially the comments on the EV and your kid. I was actually going to ask about transportation because statewide, most Western states, 40% of emissions. I don't know what it is specifically at the city level.
60%.
60%. I figured it was probably higher. Nationwide and at the state level, we're losing a lot of our policy levers. From advanced clean cars to ZEV rebates, et cetera. We do have a strong clean fuel standard here. But looking back at the last 12, 13 years, the implementation of light rail from going to not have any to suddenly have one, that's a big jump. But it can't, of course, keep expanding at that rate. So I guess I'm curious about what you see as local policy levers that do still exist exist for getting that transportation number down?
Yeah, great question. Something that keeps our Department of Transportation up. Yeah. I think it's a two-pronged approach, right? One is before we even think about electrification, we need to think about how to shift our trips from vehicle trips to other modes of transportation, whether it's mass transit or walking or biking or e-scooters or whatnot, right? So we're working heavily, our Department of Transportation is working heavily on encouraging mode shift and understanding what we need to do to make that transition happen. And then the second lever is, out of all of the trips remaining, out of all of the vehicle miles traveled remaining, that's a technical term that we use, how do we then electrify that, right? And so we have a healthy debate about which is more important, or which should, I think they're both equally important, but I think what needs to come first is mode shift, right? Let's get people out of cars to begin with, and then electrify what's remaining. And then the other sort of challenge that's sneaking out there and it's visible on the horizon is we still have freight emissions, which are a much more complex problem to solve, because we're talking about these trailer trucks that even the internal combustion engine versions are like a few $100,000, and the EV versions are twice as much. We had the fire chief at our summit yesterday was talking about that from a fire truck perspective as well. Like they've spent what was the figure?
I
Like
think it was 1.2 million for like a regular fire truck, and then an EV version is 2.3 million.
so it's that's the scale of so we often, for a lot of the solutions, we know what the answer is, but it all comes back to the money. How do we actually pay to make that happen, and how do we normalize it, right? Like that's part of it as well. Like we hear about this in the food sector as well, like about how bad food is artificially cheap, and so people find it hard to transition to good, healthy food because they're like, why does it cost so much more? Well, that's the true cost of doing things right, and that's a challenge I foresee we're going to have to face with this transition as well.
Let's see, a couple things. I wanted to maybe answer your question with some reflections back. I've been doing a lot of work with some other cities, helping them implement their climate action plans. And so I have a little view into what they're doing. I think certainly some of the things we touched on here around the changes in transportation and light rail are super visible, and you really see them very impactful. It's hard to see some of the things behind the scenes, some of the energy in the buildings and things like that as much too, but that one really pops out. I think a lot of the bike lanes and things like that, the pedestrian lanes, you really see them make a difference. And on waste also, and that's one, whenever we talk to other cities, having the curbside compost, having the single stream stuff is an envy that you hear from a lot of other cities as well. So, and then kind of a question on that, and point up on some of the kind of consumer-based, emissions, is a lot of the cities that we work with beyond a city climate action plan, they have like a citizens climate action plan as well too. Like what can you do as citizens? What are the most important things that you should do? What should you be taking advantage of the city? What should you learn about what the city's doing? And I hadn't seen that from Seattle. I'm wondering if you've been thinking about a citizens climate action plan and where you are with that.
That's a great, I can start and then you probably have thoughts. That's a really great reflection. I know in our 2013 plan, there was like a little section at the end, which was like, what can you do? But it was a very like, don't buy plastic straws kind of thing. I do think that there is space for that, and it is an important, because a lot of times when people see a climate action plan, the immediate question is like, okay, so how can I help? Or what is my role as a resident of Seattle? My hope is that there is some element of that woven into the climate action planning process. From like a waste perspective, for example, one of the things we always say is that as an individual, probably one of the greatest things that you can do is not waste food, and make sure that any food that you are wasting is getting into the compost bin, because the climate impacts there are so significant, and it is a thing that everyone has a bit of control over. So hopefully there will be these kind of more empowering kind of actions that residents can take. And I'll pass on to Annie to.
Yeah, at the counterpoint or the complementary point to that is that that doesn't absolve the city of what we need to do, right? And that's something that I wanna, we've talked about, we've debated this as well, like how much do we lean into what our constituents can do, but you know, we need to still be very clear about what our role is and what we are accountable for doing, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Is really the only thing I'd add. Like I think it's a both and situation, but yeah, we still need to pull our weight.
I do enthusiastic agreement with both of you, but I would also say like part of the city's role is to create systems where individuals both have the power to make those decisions, be a part of this, and make it visible to them. So like food waste is the huge one, and having come from the Midwest, I studied some of like the zero waste stuff Seattle did when I was in college, and like it is insane to try and set up a zero waste system at municipal level, so I'm always very grateful for it. But how we can create more systems like that as an institution, as a representative of the people, as light rail builds out, as this hub builds out, what we can do to create those ecosystems is really important, as much as building new projects, creating new policies that make these things happen.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off the last two discussions we had here, and I apologize that I came in a little late if this was addressed at all. Is there anything going into addressing the heavy fee and engineering pricing that is being thrown at homeowners around here from Seattle City Light? Like we are seeing $5,000 to put in an EV charger here, and if you don't do it, your neighbor's going to be hit with that fee, and so forth. Same with upgrading electrical panels, solar, battery backup. That's what we see, at least in my work, as the big item coming up now, preventing electrification and people going into EV adoption. Is there anything that's going on with Seattle City Light to make that more equitable and to spread that around so we don't have this rolling sticker shock of everybody on the same block asking about their EV charger or their electrical upgrade?
I'm not aware of any, but that's something we can definitely dig into. I'm not sure if you guys are, but in OED we have done some permit reform on particularly vacant buildings that have had sticker shock just to reactivate them. Some of that does support some of the decarbonization projects in the city, so it doesn't necessarily trigger a substantial alteration, which shoots things straight up. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you're talking about so we can make a more informed conversation with City Light, but that's the main thing coming up for me.
It really happens with housing, you need water, you're connected. Your pipe needs to get upgraded, you get into that entire cost.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is one person on the block is paying for everybody on the same.
Everyone's
for them. And so if they decide not to go for it, next person who asks gets hit with it. If they decide not to go for it, basically you want a line of people that have all given up on electrification until one person pulls the trigger, they pull the trigger, nobody else gets it.
Is that because the feeder need to be upgraded or why?
There's transformer limitations. I apologize, I'm on the design side, I'm not an electrician, but yeah, we have had people quoted $5,000 to do an EV charger, for example. In some cases, they have to pay $3,000 of engineering up front, and they might not recoup that if they decide it's not worth it to move forward with the project. There are certain ones that go up to $15,000 and $4,000 to $5,000 more common, and that's $700 here for themselves.
Well, this may not speak directly to that, but something we all did learn yesterday from Seattle City Light is it is wonderful that we have a greenhouse gas-free grid here. It is woefully behind on some infrastructure. A lot of that is due to
Right.
Yes, exactly. And as snowpack recedes, the ability to have clean hydro energy is going to go away. So as much as we need to bring new new generation and new storage online. The distribution system is something that City Light was quite clear. They're actively thinking about how they modernize it. And there's some fascinating stories that I was surprised about in terms of some of the economic impacts that have hit Western utilities in general. Like fun fact, Enron wrecked a lot of utilities out here because of how they spike markets. And it sounds like it took many utilities, sometimes decades, to climb out of that economic impact. So that may not translate directly to it, but I think the need to modernize is recognized in the city, and it sounds like City Light is planning on quite a lot there.
We have probably time for one last question. I'll go back here. Yeah.
Hi, this is more of a basic question that you may have covered at the beginning, but is there already a rubric out there for how you're going to convert all the data that you have out there to then drive all these investment decisions? And if not, then how are you going to develop it, right? So you've alluded to the how you have to leverage like impact today versus impact tomorrow. Some things that like 60% of emissions coming from transportation, how do you reconcile that with like other things? So I'm just curious more on the numbers front. You know, there's always when you're doing listening sessions, there's always gonna be incredible case studies out there. And then more as a data person, how do you then actually like take that, but then also leverage it against what the numbers say would be the highest impact items?
Great question. This one keeps me up at night. Yeah, it's the answer is we don't know. We don't know yet what that system is going to look like, how we're going to take all of these great project ideas and then set up a criteria to figure out how to prioritize them. What we're starting with is an equity and impact strategy framework, right? So this is something that we've been building internally. We haven't launched it yet, not even to the work group members internally. But what it's doing is asking our colleagues at the city to say, if you're coming up with an action idea, think about the levers of impact that it's going to have in addition to just emissions. Like, does it have any other positive outcomes for your communities? Does it increase access to green space or improve air quality or increase economic opportunity, right? And how are you going to measure that in your action once you implement it? How much is it going to cost? And so we're starting with those questions, but we know fully well that that's going to be a difficult process for even subject matter experts to do when they start down that pathway of like answering these questions, because some of them could be like, I don't know how much it's going to cost to retrofit all of our residential buildings with EV chargers, for example. I don't know what that cost is, right? And so we're going to come up with a bunch of actions with varying levels of granularity of detail, and that's further going to complicate how we prioritize things. So we might have a different kind of tiered system. Like, here are the things we can implement in the next 3 years. Here are the things that are going to take a little bit longer, maybe 5 or 10 years. And we have less information on that. We need to do additional research. So I think that's where we're going to land.
Thank you all so much for coming and joining us for this conversation, and thanks to everyone who attended, all your great questions and reflections. I think this is a really great first step in getting everyone really familiar with the Seattle Climate Action Plan, and we'll look forward to having another session in the new year. And you guys are looking for more community engagement on the update. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh wow, that's like smiley child. My friend. We didn't want to shame the whole thing. Let's go.